On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have
Welcome, everyone, to episode number 54 of the On the Blue Line podcast. We call this Monday Morning Roll Call, and I am your host, Wayne Mulder. This week, I want to talk about leadership. The Monday Morning Roll Call starts now. So this week I was having a conversation with one of the guys that I work with. He's a good friend, and we're actually able to spend some time together. And any of you who are in law enforcement or know anything about law enforcement, you kind of know how that works. You end up what they call 56ing, or the two cars get together and you end up talking and just chatting about different subjects. That's what you do. And you do it when call volume's low or when you have a few minutes that you can actually talk about something. So me and this friend, we had pulled up next to each other and we were going over some other things and some business things that we needed to discuss. And in that same conversation, he brought up a book that he'd been reading by a very well-known author, fellow podcaster, great guy that's doing some really amazing things out there. But he brought up this book. And the book has to do with the subject of leadership. Now, the reason I tell you this story is because this week I decided that I want to talk a little bit about leadership. And that's different than what I was going to do. I was actually going to talk about a physical assessment test, which you're probably thankful I decided to talk about leadership. Yes, no, I get it. No, we'll talk about that in the future. I got some things I want to kind of talk about with that and some benchmarks and different things that I think will be beneficial to not only law enforcement officers who may find it interesting, who are in different states, but also something that will be beneficial to people that are currently working in this state and so forth. But this week, I decided to talk about leadership because I'm sitting here next to this other fellow officer, and we have this conversation in reference to leadership, and he references this book. And we'd had some issues, not with each other, we had some issues that we're dealing with, and those issues had come to the forefront, and it came down to a question of leadership. And that was really what he was saying. He was saying, hey, in this book, this author is stating that if something goes wrong with an employee, with a subordinate, with somebody under your command, it's often the leader's fault, if we're going to use that word, if we're going to actually state fault or blame to somebody. And it led to an interesting conversation that we had. You know, when you talk that way, when you use the word fault, when you say that this leader is the reason why this subordinate is acting in a certain way or doing things that they maybe shouldn't be doing, then you get into this question of, well, is it truly the leader's fault or not? And really, the bottom line, as I see it, is that everything rises and falls on leadership. And often it is their fault, and absolutely if they don't do anything about the situation, if they allow it to fester, if they allow it to hurt the cohesive unit. That's a leader's job. That's one of the things a leader has to do, is step in. So why all this conversation about leadership, and why this week, and why this rather than physical assessment test? Well, my primary reason is because of what's going on. And I don't want to talk about all the craziness out there. Some of my Mulder minutes and some of the other things I'm putting out there, I've talked about the craziness going on with COVID-19 and the government telling everybody where to be and all that wonderful stuff. But that's not the purpose of what I'm doing here. In fact, I want this to be quite positive. But when we look at times of crisis, going all the way back, when you look at history, when you look at times when things are not going right and society is changing, and there's a fundamental problem or difference that's taking place in society, and that shift, that seismic shift to a way of life is no longer the same. Maybe we're talking as recent as like World War II, and so people are starting to plant gardens, and factories and so forth are converting to making weapons and converting to making machinery and things that support the war effort. The whole United States, the world changed to help support this effort. So anytime you have tragedy, anytime you have crisis, anytime you have pandemic, you're going to have this shift in society. Anytime you have a shift in society, you're going to be looking for leaders. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. See, when things are falling apart, we start wanting to find true leaders. We want to find somebody who's in charge. And that is our natural way of living. That's the way we are. We look to that person. So here's a couple things that came to me. First of all, the leader is looked to in times of crisis, but it's not always the person in positional authority. See, the leader isn't always the guy you think it's going to be. In fact, a lot of times it's not the guy that's the leader. It's rarely the people in Washington or the people in your state capital or the people. Some of those, yes, they step up and they become great leaders. But that's not always the person who is going to lead, because positional authority, as I've stated before, and about a year ago I did a Monday Morning Roll Call on leadership, and I talked about the fact that positional authority and actual leadership are not the same. In fact, one of the best methods that I mentioned in that podcast, and I'll say it again for those of you who haven't listened to that one of the best ways to know if you are a leader as opposed to just given positional authority is to look behind you. I mean, if you look behind you and nobody's following, then you're probably not a leader. No one's following you. So what are you leading exactly? So that's one of the things we want to look at. But a leader is going to be looked to in times of crisis. The other thing is a leader doesn't always know what to do. But a leader is supportive of the team that can develop the answer. So that's another thing, is a leader doesn't know it all. In fact, good leaders don't. In fact, if you have somebody who acts like they know it all, they're probably not a good leader. They're not the person that you're going to want to follow in this time of crisis, in this issue that's going on. The guy that comes to you and says, I have all the answers and I have it all figured out, is not a leader, not by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, a leader is a person that brings a team together who can help develop the answers in times of crisis. One of the other things is a leader is not the sole authority. If you have a leader that thinks he is the be-all and end-all and has all the knowledge, again, it's usually that guy or girl in a position of positional authority as opposed to actual leadership. But that individual, the only thing they're running around there is their mouth. You know what I mean? If you have that person, then they're not a leader, they're a dictator. If they believe that they are the sole authority on a matter, that they are the sole person who knows what to do, a good leader recognizes a higher authority. They recognize a higher authority within this world. They oftentimes will recognize a higher authority in their personal life. There is higher authority. There are people that know more than you know. And if somebody thinks they're the sole authority on a matter, very rarely are they a true leader. So, just real quickly, what are some of the trademarks of a leader? Well, there's a couple taglines, a couple statements that are made, and one, of course, that bounces around where I work is called servant leadership. And I like it. Every once in a while, you'll get a little pushback from this person or that person that doesn't maybe understand the term, but I like the term servant leadership. But I think sometimes it gets misunderstood. They hear the word servant and they start thinking down the line of like servitude. Well, that's completely different. In fact, that's not servant leadership at all. Servant leadership is rather preference of others, preference of the other person. Zig Ziglar is quoted as saying, you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. So think about that. You can have everything in life you want. So everything I want, everything you want, you can have it. You can get it. How do you do it? You help enough other people get what they want, because that's how that works. It ends up supporting you. It supports the collective. It gives you the chance, the opportunity to reach what you want by focusing on others. And that's what servant leadership is. That's one component of it. So another component is empathy. You know, empathy is not being sorry for those that are under your command. That's not empathy at all. Rather, empathy is feeling their burden. That's why empathy is so important. In fact, another quote by Zig Ziglar was, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. You know, you can have all the knowledge in the world. You can have incredible abilities, incredible God-given abilities. You have talents that are just amazing. But if you don't care for other people, if they don't feel that you care for them, none of that's going to matter. None of that is going to matter in the end, because empathy is a trademark, is an important part, a cornerstone of being a good leader. So when you talk about leadership, you can kind of boil it down, and I've touched on a couple of these quickly, but you can kind of boil it down to 4 areas. So first of all, if you want to look for good leadership, you're going to see 4 qualities, and there's many other ones, and we can, get into all sorts of conversations on this. We're not going to do that right now. I'm just solely going to concentrate on these 4. First of all, it's others focus. Like I said, servant leadership. What is the focus? If you want to question whether or not you're a good leader, whether I'm a good leader, whether the people that I'm working with, whether or not the people that I'm following are good leaders, one of the first trademarks that you want to look for is that it's going to be others focused. That's a trademark of a good leader. Another one is done by example. A good leader, and kind of in line with that whole servant leadership idea, is somebody who's willing to get their hands dirty. Now, that doesn't mean that they continue to always do the menial task, because there is a time where they've got to concentrate maybe on this level and getting these things done, and then these other things they're going to give out. They're going to mitigate these tasks and say, hey, I need you to handle this, I need you to handle this, and I need you to handle this, and they're going to distribute the workload. But they have a willingness to do the work. They have an ability to do the work, and they have a understanding of how the work is done, and they are an example of how work should be completed, no matter what genre or what type of work we are talking about. The other thing is, leadership is often communicated through vision. That's one of the things that's often lost. A good leader doesn't have to tell you, you go do this. There's a time for that, task management. There's a time to say, I need you to take A and bring it to B, and I need B to go to C. Task management is a part of being in charge. It's a part of a leadership role. But true leadership is communicated through vision. It's about being able, in fact, it's the best way of stopping the whole micromanagement issue. Instead of becoming a micromanager and saying, you do this task and do it exactly within these parameters, you communicate in vision. And a good leader can communicate that vision and get them to see it, get them to realize it, get them to want it. And if they see that vision and they want that vision, then they're going to do the work in line with the greater vision. And that is one of the ways that a good leader runs an organization. So then lastly, and again, just these top four, is leadership is communicated through mentorship and verified through successors. Good leadership is completed through mentorship and verified through successors. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean by, if you have good leaders, they're going to beget good leaders. If you don't have any successors coming up, if you see somebody who wants to keep all the cards to themselves and they don't want to share and they don't want to teach others and they don't want to mentor somebody else and they don't want to bring other people into the vision and they don't want to, because they're afraid, they're afraid that, oh, well, this person's going to take my job, or they're going to, push me out of my role, or they're going to become my boss. And that's not a good leader. If that's what you're seeing, then that's not a good leadership skill. That's not good leadership ability. Good leaders mentor. Good leaders are the type of people that bring others up and teach them how to become good leaders. And it's verified through successors. Because when those people go on, either in an organization or in government or whatever the situation be, when those people go on to do something different, that's when you really see the fruit of good leadership, because you see that they have successors. They got little baby leaders that are becoming great leaders, because that's what they've done. They've planted that soil. They've planted those good nutrients. They've taken their time and they've mentored and they've poured it into this person so that they can reach their full potential. And that is how good leadership works. It becomes this circle. So that's all I have for you this week. I know it's a little bit outside the ordinary, but we are in unprecedented times. We have things that are going on in this nation that may, at least for the foreseeable month or so, maybe longer, maybe years for all we know at this point, that are changing the way of American life. And in times of crisis and when things are changing, what do? We look to somebody to be in charge. And if that person ends up being you, and if that person ends up being me, then it is so important that at that moment that we know what a good leader is and that we are being an example of what a good leader is. So I encourage you this week as part of Monday Morning Roll Call to consider, what is a good leader? How do you fit into that role? And what steps are you going to take this week to become a better leader in your home, in your family, in your church, in your work, wherever it may be, so that we can create the next generation of great leaders that can truly make a difference in this world. All right, enough of that. That does it for this week's Monday Morning Roll Call. I hope to see you next Monday at Roll Call. And in the meantime, I'm going to see you out there on the blue line.